Patricia Holloway pointed at the photograph on the screen. A car blackened and warped beyond anything that still deserved the word, and said it without hesitation. That car is dead. Anyone still holding on to hope is wasting my time. Every head in the conference room nodded. Every head except one. Near the rear door, a man in a technician's uniform with grease still on his hands raised his hand. "I can fix it." A few quiet laughs moved through the room. Vanessa Sterling looked at his name tag, Andre Whitfield Bay Technician. She looked at the photograph. She looked back at him. She took in the dark skin, the close-cropped hair just beginning to gray at the temples, the steady eyes that did not shift away from her gaze. Then she smiled, not warmly. 30 days, she said. Starting tomorrow morning. Follow along. The man who said yes to the impossible is about to show you what that actually looks like. There is a particular silence that follows a black man speaking up in a room where 44 white-collared faces have already agreed on a conclusion. It is not hostile exactly. It is the silence of recalibration, of people quietly adjusting the categories they had already prepared. Andre Whitfield had stood inside that silence before. He knew it the way you know a draft in a familiar house. Andre Whitfield was not running from anything. That was the part people always assumed and always got wrong. He had not fled Tucson. He had not hidden in Houston. He had made a deliberate calculation, the kind of calculation you make when you are 36 years old, and you are a father first, and everything else second. And he had decided that a smaller life built carefully on ground he controlled was worth more than a larger life built on something that could collapse again. He woke at 5:45 every morning. The alarm on his phone was set to a sound his daughter Emma had chosen, a recording of a rooster that was cheerful enough to be annoying and honest enough to be effective. He dressed in the dark, moved to the kitchen, put coffee on, and then went to Emma's room and sat on the edge of her bed for exactly 4 minutes. He did not wake her. He just sat. It was a habit he had started during the worst months. 3 years ago, when sitting near her sleeping form was the only thing that reliably quieted whatever was happening inside his chest. The habit had stayed long after the worst months had passed. Emma was 6. She had her mother's deep brown skin and her father's wide, steady eyes, and a head full of tight coils that Andre had learned to detangle on Sunday evenings with a wide-toothed comb and a jar of shea butter sitting cross-legged on the living room floor while she leaned back against his knees and narrated the events of her week. He had taught himself to do her hair from videos on his phone in the months after Simone died, sitting alone in their kitchen at midnight, watching strangers with patient hands explain things her mother would have known without thinking. He had cried the first 3 times he tried. He had stopped crying eventually, not because it stopped being hard, but because Emma had started watching his face for cues about what kind of day they were having. And he had decided she would not learn sadness from him if he could help it. She carried a stuffed bear named Bolt, named, as she had explained to Andre with great seriousness, because bears were fast. Andre had not corrected her. She brought Bolt everywhere, to the grocery store, to the park, to the small table near the kitchen window where she sat in the mornings and drew shapes with crayons, while Andre checked the day's schedule. The schedule on this particular Monday showed 2 transmission services, 1 brake inspection, and a fluid change on a delivery van that had been sitting in Bay 3 for longer than it should have. Andre had worked at Sterling Automotive Group for 7 months. He had taken the job because it was 40 minutes from Emma's daycare, because the pay was adequate, and because the foreman who interviewed him had not asked too many questions. He had also taken it because he had walked through 3 other shops in Houston where the conversation had ended politely the moment he stepped through the door, and Sterling was the first place where the foreman had simply looked at his hands and asked when he could start. Andre had listed his experience simply 10 years in automotive repair. He did not mention that for most of those 10 years, he had been running Whitfield Restoration Works, the shop his father had built in Tucson, from nothing over the course of 3 decades. A shop that one black man had opened in 1979 in a part of town where banks would not give him a loan, so he had borrowed from his church, from his cousins, from a barber on 22nd Street who believed in him before the rest of the city did. A shop that had rebuilt vehicles others said could not be rebuilt. That had become known in collector circles across the Southwest as the place you brought the impossible cases. He did not mention it because the shop was gone. Not in a dramatic way. It had simply dissolved in the months after Simone died. First the contracts, then the staff, then the clients who waited and then stopped waiting, and finally the building itself sold to cover the debt that grief and absence had allowed to accumulate. Andre had watched it go without fighting it. He did not have the energy to fight it, and he was not sure he wanted to. Tucson without Simone was a city that had turned the wrong color. Houston was not better. Exactly. But it was different, and different was enough. There is something worth pausing on here in the way a man of 36 chooses smallness on purpose. Our culture tells us that ambition is the proper response to loss, that you climb out of grief by climbing toward something. But sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is admit that he needs the ground to be quiet for a while, that he needs to be a father first and a craftsman second and everything else not at all. Andre had not failed his old life. He had set it down gently, the way you set down a tool you have been gripping too hard for too long. Darius Webb, who worked the bay next to Andre's, had noticed something about him within the first 2 weeks. He had mentioned it to 2 different colleagues and been dismissed both times, but he kept noticing it. Andre Whitfield could place his hand on the hood of any vehicle in the facility, close his eyes for 30 seconds, and diagnosed the primary mechanical issue with an accuracy that no scanner in the building could consistently match. He did not explain the method. When Darius asked, Andre said only that he had been doing it long enough that the sounds and the vibrations had a vocabulary he had learned to read. Darius thought about that for a long time and decided it was not a satisfying explanation, but was probably the truest one available. On that Monday morning, Andre was crossing the facility yard toward Bay 1 when the flatbed pulled in from the south gate. He heard it before he saw it at the particular sound a heavy truck makes when it is carrying something that shifts slightly with every movement, something large and unstable. He turned. The flatbed was carrying a shape under a canvas tarp, and even under the tarp the outline was unmistakable to anyone who had spent enough years in the company of American muscle cars from a specific and unrepeatable era. Andre stopped walking. He looked at it for 3 seconds. Then he turned back toward Bay 1 and continued to work. The vehicle on that flatbed had a history that began with a factory in Hamtramck, Michigan, in the autumn of 1969, and it had been complicated ever since. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible finished in a color the factory called FC7 Vitamin C Orange, a shade so assertive it was sometimes said to be visible from across a parking lot in complete darkness, was not a common car when it was new, and it was rarer still now. Of the original production run, only 14 convertible examples equipped with the 426 cubic inch Hemi engine and the 4-speed manual transmission were confirmed to still exist. Walter Pemberton owned one of them. Walter Pemberton was 62 years old and had spent the better part of 4 decades making and managing large amounts of money in Houston real estate and energy. He was not sentimental as a rule. He was precise, patient, and had a quality that people who worked with him described variously as stillness or cold, depending on whether they were on the side that was winning. He had purchased the Cuda at a private auction in Charleston the previous year, paying $900,000 for it, which was below what it deserved, but above what anyone else in the room was willing to go. He had planned to restore it, not sell it, not exhibit it for profit, but restore it and keep it. The reason he had wanted it was something he did not discuss in boardrooms or investment meetings. The reason was that his father had owned a Cuda in exactly the same color, and that car had been destroyed in a warehouse fire in 1978 when Walter was 14 years old. And there were things that happened to you at 14 that you spent the rest of your life either running from or trying to get back to. 3 weeks before the meeting on the 14th floor, a fire broke out in the Sterling storage facility where the Cuda had been kept during the pre-restoration assessment period. The fire consumed 60% of the car's exterior panels. The suppression system flooded the engine bay. The chassis exposed to the sustained heat of a facility fire, and then the sudden cold of the suppression water shifted along the primary frame rail. Patricia Holloway's team measured the deviation at 12 millimeters. Patricia Holloway was the director of technical operations at Sterling Automotive. She had 5 engineers with her, and they spent 11 days with the car before reaching their conclusion. The conclusion was precise and professionally delivered. The cost of restoration would exceed the car's recoverable value. The car was, in their professional assessment, a total loss. Walter Pemberton had listened to Patricia's presentation from the far end of the conference table. He had not interrupted. When she finished, he had asked one question. "Is there anyone here," he said, "who genuinely believes they can fix it?" The room had not answered. Walter had nodded once, finished his coffee, and left. Vanessa Sterling was 38 years old and had been running her father's company for 5 years. Before that, she had spent 7 years proving to everyone in the building, including quietly her father, that she understood the business better than anyone he might otherwise have given it to. She had a degree in business administration from Rice and a second in finance from Wharton. And she used both the way a surgeon uses instruments efficiently, without flourish, and always in service of the outcome she had already determined was correct. The company had grown its revenue by 18% annually for 5 consecutive years under her leadership. The Texas edition of Forbes had called her the Iron Wheel of Houston, a phrase she had not liked but had not disputed. She called the meeting on Monday morning because the car needed a decision, and decisions delayed were decisions mismanaged. She had looked at Patricia's report herself over the weekend, had run the numbers 3 different ways, and had arrived at the same place Patricia had. Write it off. Recover what the insurance would provide. Move forward. She did not enjoy presenting that conclusion to Walter Pemberton. Walter was not simply a client. He was the largest single non-family investor in Sterling Group. But sentiment in Vanessa's estimation was something you made room for after the numbers were settled, not before. She had finished her presentation, stated her conclusion, and was organizing the talking points for the next agenda item. When Andre raised his hand, she looked at him the way she sometimes looked at variables in financial models that didn't align with expectations, with attention first, then assessment. He was standing near the rear door. He had been called into the meeting specifically to confirm one technical detail in Patricia's report, which he had done, and he had been standing quietly ever since. He was not young, not old. He had the kind of hands that showed their history, and he was now telling her, in front of 44 people, including Walter Pemberton, that he could do what her team of 5 professional engineers had declared impossible. "You've read Patricia's full report?" she asked. "Yes. And you still believe you can accomplish this in 30 days? "I don't know what their timeline was. Mine is 30 days. There was a pause in the room that had a particular texture. The texture of people calculating whether to laugh and deciding against it for reasons they could not quite name. Walter Pemberton, at the far end of the table, was looking at Andre with an expression that no one else in the room seemed to be reading correctly. He was not amused. He was paying attention. "Vanessa," Walter said. His voice was quiet. "Let him try." Vanessa looked at Walter, then at Andre, then at the photograph of the destroyed car. She placed the small digital timer she kept on the podium, the one she used for presentations, on the edge of the conference table. 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, she said. "If you fail, you understand the terms." Andre looked at the timer. "I understand." He did not smile. He did not look around the room. He picked up the folder he had brought with him, turned, and walked out through the rear door. That evening, Andre picked Emma up from daycare at 5:15. She came through the door at a run the way she always did, Bolt swinging by one arm, and she knew immediately that something was different about her father's face, because she stopped 2 feet away from him and looked at him carefully before she climbed up for her hug. "Did something happen?" she asked. He carried her to the car. "Daddy took on a hard job today," he said, the way fathers say things to small daughters when the day has been heavier than usual. "But I know how to do it." She considered this as he buckled her in. "Is it a big car?" He smiled. "Very big." "Okay," she said, and opened Bolt's ear the way she did when she had decided something was settled. He made red beans and rice for dinner the way his grandmother had taught him in a kitchen in Louisiana when he was 9 years old, the recipe written nowhere but in his hands. Emma sat at the small table with her crayons while he cooked. And after dinner, she drew what she announced was a picture of a car that was getting better, which turned out to look somewhat like a rectangular orange cloud, and which Andre folded carefully and put in his shirt pocket. What does a man teach a 6-year-old about courage when he himself does not know if he is being brave or foolish? Andre had not yet decided which one he was. The line between them is thinner than most adults pretend. The world rewards us for the version where it worked and quietly disposes of the version where it did not. But on the kitchen floor that evening, watching his daughter draw an orange cloud and call it a car, Andre understood that the answer was simpler than he had been trying to make it. You teach a child courage by letting her see you try. The outcome was never the lesson. The willingness was. He read Patricia's report again after Emma was asleep. All 47 pages at the kitchen table with his coffee. Patricia was thorough. Her team was experienced, and they had been wrong about 2 things that mattered enough to change the conclusion entirely. The frame deviation was not the result of thermal distortion. It was a broken weld joint on the secondary crossmember, which meant the frame itself was intact and the deviation was correctable without replacement. The engine's condition, while serious, was not as catastrophic as the report suggested. The water had entered through the air intake during suppression and had reached the carburetor, but the bore showed no scoring consistent with hydrolocking under compression. If the engine had not been running when the water entered, and based on the fire timeline, it had not been, there was a real possibility the bottom end was salvageable. The wiring was a different matter. That was a complete loss. Everything from the firewall forward would need to be rebuilt from the original schematics. Andre had those schematics. His father had obtained photocopies of factory service documentation for every significant American muscle car produced between 1964 and 1972. He had spent years building that archive, walking into dealerships in 3 different states, asking polite questions, slipping $20 bills to service managers who were willing to let him photocopy what most people considered worthless paper. And Andre had kept those binders the way other men kept family photographs. They were in a box in his closet under the winter blankets where they had been since he moved to Houston. He arrived at the facility at 10 that night. The overnight security guard, a quiet older man named Hank with a Vietnam veteran's cap, and the long-armed patience of someone who had stopped expecting to be surprised, handed him the key card that Vanessa had arranged to be activated for 24-hour access. The 2 of them had spoken maybe 15 total words in 7 months. Hank nodded at Andre that night the way one tired man nods at another, and Andre nodded back, and that was enough. Andre walked through the empty facility to the bay where the Cuda had been placed, and he stood in front of it under the yellow overhead light, and he put his hand on the warped and blackened hood, the way he always put his hand on a vehicle he was meeting for the first time. He stood there for 3 minutes. The building was very quiet. The car did not feel dead to him. It felt like something that had been hurt badly and then left alone with no one listening. He opened his notebook and began to write. He did not use diagnostic software. He used a notebook that had been his father's, a composition book with a dark green cover, half filled with his father's handwriting in the careful, slanted script of a man who had been taught penmanship in a segregated schoolhouse in the 1950s, and half with Andre's. And he wrote in 2 columns, left column observable damage, right column probable actual condition. By 1:30 in the morning, he had 7 pages of notes and a working order of operations that he knew with the particular certainty that comes not from confidence but from experience was correct. He looked at the digital timer Vanessa had placed on the corner of the bay workbench. Someone had moved it there, perhaps as a reminder, or perhaps as a joke. Andre picked it up, looked at it for a moment, and set it back down. 30 days, he said quietly to the car, to himself, to no one in particular. Then he drove home, slept for 4 hours, and was back by 6 o'clock in the morning. There is something worth saying gently to anyone listening, and especially to anyone who has ever been told no or counted out or written off. The world will hand you a report. The report will be thorough. The report will have numbers and credentials and signatures, and the report will sometimes be wrong, not because the people who wrote it lacked skill, but because they were measuring with the wrong instrument. Before you accept anyone's verdict on what is finished in your life, put your own hand on the hood. Listen for yourself. Some things that look dead are only waiting for someone who knows how to listen. The first 3 days, Andre worked alone. He did not ask for assistance, and no one offered it. He began by removing everything interior that remained: the seats, the dash components, the remnants of the carpet, and laying each piece in order on the floor of the bay so he could assess what was salvageable and what was not. Darius stopped by on the morning of the second day, looked at the systematic arrangement on the bay floor, and left without saying anything. He came back an hour later with 2 cups of coffee and set one outside the bay door without knocking. Patricia Holloway appeared on the 4th day. She came in without announcement, stood in front of the large paper diagram Andre had taped to the bay wall, a hand-drawn schematic of every damage zone mapped against the vehicle's original structure, and studied it for 4 minutes. "You're spending time on the secondary cross member," she said. "We assessed that." "I know. The deviation at the frame rail is coming from the broken weld, not the rail itself." She was quiet for a moment. "We had that notation in the preliminary. It wasn't in the final report." Another pause. "No," she said, "it wasn't." She left. Andre continued working. It is worth noticing what Patricia did not do in that moment. She did not defend the report. She did not argue. She did not retreat into credentials. She had built her career inside a discipline that rewarded certainty, and she had just been shown that her team had quietly dropped a piece of true information in the process of arriving at a confident conclusion. That is one of the harder moments in any professional life. Patricia walked out of that bay carrying it, and she came back later again and again, which is the only real measure of whether a person is willing to learn or merely willing to appear competent. Walter Pemberton came on the 10th day. He did not call ahead. He simply appeared at the bay entrance at 7 o'clock in the evening when the rest of the facility was emptying out, wearing a jacket and holding a paper coffee cup, as though he had just come from somewhere else, and this had been an unplanned stop. He stood at the entrance and watched Andre work for a long time without saying anything. Andre knew he was there. He did not stop working. Eventually, Walter said, "You know what color that is?" It was not a question. Andre set down his tool. "Vitamin C, FC7. Walter nodded slowly. "My father's car was the same color." Andre looked at him directly. He had heard Walter say it once before over the phone in the parking lot 3 days before the meeting, a conversation Andre had not been meant to overhear. He did not mention that now. He just held Walter's eyes for a moment. Walter looked away first, back at the car. Neither of them said anything more. It was, Andre would later think, one of the most complete conversations he could remember having in a long time. On the 9th day, he spent $3,400 of his own money on original parts from a supplier in Michigan. Darius found out and called him that evening. "You know they're not going to reimburse that," Darius said. "I don't know that." "Andre." "Darius." A pause. "You're either the most competent person I've ever worked next to," Darius said, "or you're a man having a very slow breakdown." "Both are possible," Andre said. Vanessa came to the bay on the 16th day at 7 o'clock in the evening without announcement. Andre was welding his face behind the mask, and he did not see her come in. She stood near the entrance, arms crossed, and watched. He was working on the fuel line, routing careful, methodical, no motion wasted, and she watched for nearly 15 minutes before he lifted the mask and saw her. He did not appear startled. "What do you need?" he asked. "I'm looking," she said, "at the fuel lines at the work." He set the torch down. "I need $8,700 for the wiring harness. I've already used $3,400 of my own." She was quiet. "Send the request through Patricia." He nodded. "The $3,400, send that too." She left. 2 days later, without explanation, without follow-up email, without anything beyond a single word in the subject line, his submitted request came back approved. He sent Darius a photo of the email. Darius replied with 3 question marks and nothing else. Vanessa submitted the approval and then did something she did not fully acknowledge to herself for several days. She began checking on the work, not formally, not through reports. She began taking the long route through the facility to her car in the evenings. the route that went past the window that looked down into the lower bay level. She started doing it once a day, then twice. She mentioned to Patricia with studied casualness whether Patricia had any updated assessment of the project's viability. Patricia took a moment before answering. "The cross-member work he did," she said finally. "I don't believe there's a second technician in Houston who could have done that by hand. We tried with equipment and stopped." Vanessa nodded as if this were minor new data and walked away. She did not go back to ask more. She had grown up in this industry, or rather near it. She had grown up watching her father love it, watching the way his voice changed when he talked about vehicles, the way other men talked about art. She had never learned to love it the same way. She had learned to understand it, to manage it, to grow it. But there was something in the way Andre Whitfield worked. Not fast, not theatrical, not interested in being watched, that touched something she did not have a ready category for. It is a particular kind of attention what Vanessa was beginning to do. She had spent her career running numbers across the surface of things. Now she was being asked quietly and without anyone forcing her to look beneath the numbers at the human being holding the welding torch. The willingness to revise yourself in the middle of a quarter, in the middle of a year, in the middle of a life is the rarest currency any leader actually possesses. Vanessa did not yet know she was spending it, but she was. On the 22nd day, Emma was with Andre because the daycare was closed for a staff day. Andre had made arrangements for her to sit in the lobby with books and her drawing supplies. He had braided her hair that morning in 2 careful cornrows, ending in small purple beads that clicked together when she moved her head the way Simone used to do it, the way he had finally, after 3 years, learned to do it himself. And when Vanessa walked through on her way to an afternoon meeting, she saw a small girl sitting very straight on the waiting room bench. Bolt the bear propped beside her, the beads at the ends of her braids catching the light as she turned a page reading a picture book with an expression of intense concentration. Vanessa stopped. One of the front desk staff appeared at her elbow. "She's Andre's daughter," the woman said. "He's down in the tech bay." Vanessa looked at the girl. Emma looked up at that moment the way children do when they feel eyes on them and regarded Vanessa with full calm attention. "Hi," Emma said. "Hi," Vanessa said. Emma returned to her book. Vanessa continued to her meeting. That afternoon, when the lobby was empty, someone left a small box of shortbread cookies on the bench where Emma had been sitting. There was no note. 4 days before the deadline, Vanessa came to the bay in the evening and sat down on the shop stool near the workbench. Andre was working on the body panels. The new paint had been applied in primer, and he was beginning the careful process of color matching the vitamin C orange from the surviving sections of original paint. Vanessa sat and watched for a moment, and then she asked, "Why didn't you tell me who you were before the meeting?" Andre did not stop working, because it wasn't relevant to the car. It was relevant to me. "Yes," he said, but the car didn't care. She looked at the vehicle, the orange beginning to emerge through the primer, the chrome beginning to reassemble itself into something coherent and unmistakable. "I said it was dead," she said. "You had every reason to believe that." She turned to look at him. "That's generous. It's accurate. You had Patricia's report and 12 millimeters of deviation on a frame rail. I'd have called it the same way. But you didn't. I had information you didn't." She was quiet for a while. The sound of the work filled the space between them, the gentle drag of the polishing cloth, the occasional click of a tool being set down. Finally, she said, "I was wrong." She didn't dress it up. Andre nodded once. "What happened to your shop?" she asked. He stopped working, set the cloth down. "My wife died," he said, not bitterly, not as an explanation that required sympathy, just as a fact that contained its own gravity. Vanessa did not say she was sorry, which Andre noticed and appreciated. She said Emma. She was 3, and the shop couldn't hold both. Chose Emma. He picked the cloth back up. Vanessa sat on the stool for another 20 minutes and did not ask any more questions, and the silence between them was not uncomfortable. On the 28th day at 11 o'clock in the evening, Andre sat in the driver's seat of the Cuda and turned the key. Nothing. The engine did not turn over. It did not cough, did not stutter, did not make any sound suggesting life deferred. It was simply silent in the way that machinery is silent when it has no intention of running. Andre sat with both hands on the steering wheel and looked through the windshield at the bay wall and understood with complete clarity that the ignition timing was wrong. The rebuilt distributor he had sourced was correct for the engine and era, but the relationship between the new points and the carburetor's original vacuum advance a relationship that existed in a 60-year-old document written by engineers who had calibrated everything in a factory with different equipment than anything Andre had available was not aligned correctly. He knew how to fix it. The method was to adjust it manually by ear and by eye without a timing light, without a bench analyzer turning the distributor in increments small enough that most people would say the adjustment was not an adjustment at all. It was a method his father had demonstrated on a Dodge Charger in a garage in Tucson when Andre was 14 years old on a Saturday afternoon when the light came through the garage window at a low angle, and his father's dark hands, scarred at the knuckles from 40 years of holding hot metal, moved with the particular patience of someone who understood that some work simply took the time it took. His father had said something that afternoon that Andre had never forgotten. He had said, "Son, the world is going to be in a hurry around you for the rest of your life. Don't let it teach you to rush this." He had 15 hours. Darius called at midnight. Well, Andre told him. Darius was quiet. How long to fix it? 9 hours if it goes right. 15 if it doesn't. Another pause. You want company? No, but thank you. He heard Darius shift the phone. You're going to do it. Darius said it was not a question. Andre did not answer. He got out of the car and opened his notebook. At 6 o'clock in the morning, Emma called from the neighbor's house where she had stayed the night. She knew without being told that something significant was happening. Daddy, are you okay? You didn't come home. I'm okay. I'm finishing the big car. The big car. Did it wake up yet? He closed his eyes. Not yet, but it's going to. I know, she said. You always fix things, Daddy, even when they're really broken. He sat on the bay floor with the phone to his ear and said nothing for a moment. Then go eat your breakfast. I'll come get you at noon. Okay, she said. Tell the car I said hi. He worked through this morning. He adjusted the distributor in increments, started the engine attempt, listened, adjusted again. It was the kind of work that looks like nothing from the outside. A man turning a small component a few degrees at a time and is actually the most demanding kind of work there is because it has no external reference point. You cannot look it up. You cannot check a screen. You listen, and you feel, and you compare what you hear and feel to a standard that exists only inside you. Built from every engine you have ever worked on over 20 years of doing nothing else. At 8:17 in the evening on the 29th day, Andre sat behind the wheel of the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible, placed his hand on the key and turned it. The engine did not hesitate. The 426 cubic inch Hemi caught on the first revolution and climbed to idle with a sound that there was no other accurate way to describe it. Unmistakably alive. A deep, even authoritative sound that filled the bay and traveled through the concrete floor and arrived in the chest of the man sitting behind the wheel as something very close to what relief feels like when you have been carrying its absence for a long time. Andre sat with both hands on the wheel for 60 seconds. He did not move. The engine ran. He counted the idle, steady, clean, no variation. He listened to the valve train quiet as it should be. He listened to the exhaust note through the primary pipes and heard nothing that didn't belong. Then he picked up his phone and called Emma. It was late. She was already in bed at the neighbor's. She answered after 4 rings, her voice thick with sleep. "Daddy, I'm done," he said. The car woke up. He smiled. It was the first time he had smiled in 30 hours. The car woke up. What it took for Andre to arrive at that moment is not the part of the story most people will remember. They will remember the engine, the orange paint, the crowd assembling the next morning. They will remember the visible victory. But the work that mattered most happened in the hours nobody saw. The patience without an audience. The small turns of a small component in a quiet bay. There is a kind of effort the world does not film, does not applaud, does not even know to look for. It is the effort that builds people and craftsmen and parents. If you are doing that kind of work right now in some quiet corner of your own life, and no one has noticed, please understand that the work is real. The notice will come later. The work is what matters first. The following morning, the 30th day, the bay doors were covered on the outside with canvas barriers that said, "Service in progress." A flatbed stood by to move the vehicle if needed, though it was not going to be needed. Walter Pemberton arrived at 7 o'clock and sat on a folding chair outside the closed bay door with a coffee cup and no apparent need to speak to anyone. Several members of Patricia's team arrived and stood in a group near the far wall. A small number of Walter's associates, whom he had invited the previous week, with a note that said only something worth seeing, gathered near the facility entrance, with the polite, slightly puzzled energy of people who have been told to show up without being told why. Vanessa Sterling arrived at 8:59. She wore a gray jacket and carried a coffee that had gone cold during the drive. She stood next to Walter Pemberton and looked at the covered bay doors and said nothing. At exactly 9 o'clock, the doors opened. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda convertible rolled out into the Houston morning light. The color arrived first, vitamin C orange FC7. So vivid it seemed to push back against the pale morning sky. Not restored to adequacy, but restored to excess to the original intention of a factory that had chosen this color precisely because it refused to be ignored. The chrome caught the light across every surface simultaneously. The convertible top was down, folded cleanly behind the rear seats, and beneath everything running with the measured low-frequency authority of a big block engine that has been correctly rebuilt and correctly tuned, came the sound. The crowd assembled outside that bay was not a sentimental group. These were engineers, executives, investors, and yet the sound stopped conversation. Not because it was loud, because it was right. There is a frequency at which a correctly running 426 Hemi operates that is distinct from every other engine configuration ever produced in the American muscle era, and anyone who has heard it knows it immediately, even if they have not heard it in decades. Walter Pemberton had last heard it when he was 14 years old. Andre stepped out from the bay. He was wearing the same technician's uniform he had worn to the meeting 30 days earlier, and there was a trace of grease along his left wrist that he had not had time to fully remove. He did not carry anything. He did not make any kind of announcement. He simply stood beside the car and looked at Walter. The old man walked to the car slowly. He stopped at the hood and he placed his hand on it flat palm the way you place your hand when you are checking something that matters. He stood there with his eyes forward and his shoulders very still. 10 seconds. 15. Then his shoulders moved in a way that had nothing to do with composure. He was 62 years old and had crossed 5 decades of hard commercial landscape without ever letting anyone see him falter. Andre stood beside him and said nothing. He did not look away. He did not make it easier. Sometimes the right thing to do is to let the weight of a moment be its full weight. Patricia Holloway approached the car from the passenger side. She crouched and looked at the underside of the rocker panel, stood, ran her hand along the line of the door, checked the alignment of the hood to the fenders. She went around the car twice. Then she stood in front of Andre. The cross member, she said, "I need you to tell me exactly how you did it." He told her. She listened to every word. When he finished, she said, "I was wrong in the report. You didn't have enough information to reach a different conclusion." She looked at him steadily. "That's the second time you've said that to someone?" "It's true, both times." She nodded. Not the nod of agreement, but the nod of someone receiving something difficult and deciding to receive it cleanly. Vanessa had not moved from where she was standing. She was watching Walter Pemberton, who was now simply resting his hand on the hood of the car with his eyes closed, and she was aware of something happening in her own chest that she did not have a ready word for. Andre walked over. She turned. He stopped a few feet away, and they looked at each other across the few feet of Houston morning between them. "You won," she said. "It wasn't a competition," he said. "It was his car. I just gave it back." She looked at the vehicle. She looked at Walter. She looked back at Andre. "I said it was dead. You had good reasons. You didn't believe me. I heard something you didn't. She waited. He said something, still breathing. The sound of small running feet on concrete arrived before the voice did. Emma came through the side door at a run. Bolt's arm clenched in her fist, the purple beads at the ends of her braids clicking softly, because Darius had collected her from the neighbor's house and brought her at Andre's request, and no one had explained to her what she was going to see. She stopped 10 feet from the car. Her mouth opened. The Cuda was running, and it was orange, and it was enormous. And it was the most completely alive-looking machine she had ever seen in 6 years of looking at machines. "Daddy," she breathed. "Daddy, it's so pretty." Andre crossed the space between them and picked her up. She wrapped both arms around his neck, the small beads in her hair brushing against his cheek, and then she leaned back and extended one hand toward the car very seriously in the manner of a formal greeting. "Hi, car," she said. "My daddy fixed you. You're all better now." The sound that moved through the assembled crowd, the executives, the engineers, the investors, was not the sound of people performing sentiment. It was the sound of people being caught by something genuine at a moment when they were not prepared for it. Walter Pemberton, from inside the driver's seat, heard it. He opened his eyes and looked through the windshield at Andre and Emma, and for the first time that morning he smiled. Walter drove the car slowly around the perimeter of the facility. One full loop, careful and deliberate. The way you move when you are carrying something that you have waited a very long time to hold again. The sound of the Hemi moving through the open space of the facility yard was the sound of something returned from a great distance. Vanessa watched it go. The coffee in her hand had been cold for an hour. She did not notice. The next morning, Vanessa asked Andre to come to her office. She offered him a position that had not existed in the company before that morning. She had created it the previous evening working at her desk after everyone else had gone home. Director of Classic Restoration, full technical authority over all vintage vehicle projects, a salary 3 times what he was earning. Andre listened to everything. Then he said, "I have final say on all technical decisions." "Yes. If I tell you something can't be done, you accept that without a second review." She paused. "Then yes." "All right," he said. "I'll take it." Walter Pemberton requested a private meeting. He handed Andre a sealed envelope. Andre opened it, looked at what was inside, and set it on the desk. "I can't accept this." Walter regarded him. "Why not?" "Because that's not why I did it." The old man leaned back in his chair and studied Andre for a long moment. "Then tell me why you did it." Andre was quiet. "Then my father taught me that a car is never really dead as long as someone is still willing to listen to it. I heard yours listening." Walter picked up the envelope and slid it back across the desk. "Then consider this Emma's tuition," he said. From Walter, not from the owner of the car. Andre looked at the envelope. He looked at Walter. He picked it up. Patricia Holloway found Andre in the new workspace. He had been assigned a larger bay at the north end of the facility with better lighting and a parts storage room attached. She stood at the entrance with her hands at her sides. "The timing adjustment on the Hemi," she said. "Would you teach me?" Andre looked up from the workbench. "Yes, but you have to put the diagnostic software away first." She considered this. "For how long?" "For as long as it takes you to trust what you're hearing instead of what the screen is telling you." A pause. "How long did that take you?" "My father started when I was 12. I got it right at 14. Patricia was quiet. Then she nodded and pulled up a shop stool. A week later, Andre was working late in the new Bay 3 projects on the board now. The first real inventory of a department that had not existed a month ago. Vanessa came by at the end of her day. She stopped at the bay entrance not to inspect or assess, but simply because she had been walking past and then was not walking past. "How's Emma?" she asked. Andre looked up. It was not the kind of question he had expected, and for a moment he simply registered the unexpectedness of it. "She read 3 words in a row this morning," he said. "By herself, without help." Vanessa tilted her head. 3 for her. That's the whole world. A quiet beat between them. The kind that contains more than what is being said. "Do you want coffee?" she said. "I know a place close enough. Emma's with Darius, so you have time." Andre set down the tool he was holding. He looked at her for a moment, not assessing, not calculating, just looking, and then he reached for his jacket. That night, after Emma was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Andre sat at the kitchen table with his father's notebook open in front of him. The page from 30 days ago, the 2 columns, the observation and the diagnosis, was still there. He looked at it for a while. Then he turned to a fresh page. He wrote 3 project names at the top. He looked at the wall where Emma had taped her drawing of the orange car, getting better the rectangular cloud that she had insisted was a Cuda, and which Andre had agreed was exactly that. He picked up the pencil. He wrote a 4th name. 3 weeks ago, Vanessa Sterling had stood in a room and told 44 people that a car was dead, and she had been right in every way that a person can be right when they have all the available evidence and none of the missing piece. The missing piece had been a man who had learned a long time ago in a garage in Tucson that the difference between something dead and something waiting is nothing more than this: someone willing to be quiet enough and patient enough and present enough to hear the difference. Andre Whitfield had heard it, and 30 days later, on a Houston morning in a color called vitamin C, something that everyone had agreed was finished, had driven out into the light and proved them wrong. And maybe that is the gentlest lesson worth carrying away from this. We live in a world that rewards loud confidence and quick verdicts. That tells us competence must announce itself, that worth must explain itself, that fathers must perform their love in public to have it counted. But the people who actually change the rooms they walk into are usually the ones who walk in quietly, do the work. No one watches and let the results speak for them. Be patient with what looks broken in your life. Be patient with what looks broken in the people around you. And be especially patient with yourself on the long nights when no one is calling and the only audience for your effort is the small voice inside that already knows you are doing it right. The orange car will roll out into the morning when it is ready, and so will you.